Just making sure Sean's there. Yeah, cool. Okay, yeah, I might start.
Welcome back.
Perhaps the second or third person I ever pitched was Rogan.
But actually, this is a good, clear slide.
To be honest, I sort of don't know what I was trying to get across here. Hi everyone, welcome to season 2 of Provision, episode 1. We have a corker for you today, or at least I feel like it's going to be a corker, because we'll be going through, perhaps embarrassingly, my pitch deck. I'm also joined by Rogan from the Pro Founders team. Rogan, I don't know if you want to say hi to everybody.
Welcome back. Thank you, VK. And as he says, I spare his blushing, he pitched this deck ostensibly to Pro Founders before we were so utterly impressed with him. We lured him away to venture, but he did so knowing it was a bit early, but with the very sensible view of wanting introductions into earlier stage uses.
Perfect. And in terms of, I guess, background from my part, as Rogan said, before I became a VC, I pitched FREAD to him. FREAD was around for a year. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. The company failed, as is often the case with startups. FREAD began, and what you'll see in the pitch deck, as an idea to create a paywall for the internet, where consumers could pay a few pence to access news and journalism across the web without having to subscribe to multiple different publishers. We wanted to eliminate that frustration that you might be aware of when you hit a paywall because you wanted to read an article from, say, the Times or the FT. Perhaps the second or third person I ever pitched was Rogan. I was introduced to him by my ex-boss. He said that I should speak to Rogan about the idea and the business more generally. And as Rogan identified, having done my research, I was pretty sure that it wasn't going to be an exact fit for Pro Founders, given that it was very, very early pre-seed stage. But it was always good to sort of grasp every opportunity you have. So I took the meeting and I was very keen to do so because it was a warm introduction. Now that I've set the scenes in terms of the format, we'll be departing from the typical Q&A that we usually do in our episodes. Instead, Rogan and I are going to flip through the pages of the deck. I'll start by explaining why I put what I did in the slide and what I was thinking and what I wanted to convey. Rogan and I will then have a discussion about the key takeaway that he would have had as a VC looking at the slide for the first time. And then hopefully we can touch on ways to potentially improve those pages and how to get the message across a bit more clearly. We'll then cover a few things that I missed in the deck. And if we have time, we'll then open it up to questions. I'll probably invite Sean, who's a regular on Provision, back into the conversation. We received a few questions beforehand, so it would be good to get Rogan and Sean's view more generally on pitch decks and some of those questions that you asked. Like I said, having briefly flipped through it beforehand, I'll own up and say this isn't the best deck in the world, and that's probably putting it lightly. I think the reason we specifically want to go through this is that we hope that we can have a constructive conversation around it, about how to improve it, and hopefully that's helpful to early stage founders who are doing this for the first time to perhaps avoid some of the mistakes that I made, almost the advice I sort of wished I'd received before pulling the deck together. So I'm ready if you are, Rogan.
Absolutely.
Cool. And so I should mention we're going to try and keep to a 1 minute 30 or 90 second per slide as per sort of last season. So let's see how that goes. I'm not sure we're going to need it on this one. The title page, I'll start the timer anyway. I was just trying to tell people that this was FREAD. Don't know if there's anything to say beyond that, Rogan.
I got that from the slide, but and just to add, for what it's worth, I quite like the style as well. So good opening slide.
Right. Hopefully it's not downhill from here. So if you go to the next page, to be honest, I sort of don't know what I was trying to get across here. I think I was trying to sort of give the impression that FREAD was this new, innovative company that was doing something different in the news space. But I'll stop there and let Rogan tell you what he thought when he saw this.
I think that actually was what I thought. So I actually don't mind this slide. It doesn't tell you that much, but what it does tell you is we're targeting a big market, which is the newspaper market. So as a way of maybe hooking me in, I was kind of okay with this. I probably looked at it and thought, not sure what it does yet, but I know which market it's going after. And you've used the word news, so I guess that kind of hits the innovative nature of our investments.
Okay, cool. Stop there. Next slide. So this one's a bit more detailed. So I guess in this slide, I was trying to illustrate what is going on in the world and why I thought it was suboptimal. I was trying to explain, as you might be able to see, that from a consumer perspective, they wanted to read more news from different sources, but they didn't want to have to pay a lot for the privilege of doing that. And from the publisher perspective, I was hoping to try and articulate that because people weren't subscribing and because they weren't allowed to read news in this way, it was a lost revenue opportunity. And the current approaches that they were sort of toying with weren't going to help them solve that problem. So that's kind of what I wanted to articulate.
Yeah, I didn't get any of that. I mean, literally none of it. And I tell you, it'd be interesting to know what the viewers think. But there's too much on this slide, and I don't. VCs probably don't read through it quickly enough. But for me, when I did read through it just now, it's a bit higgledy-piggledy. There's something about the publisher. There's something about the consumer. This, I guess, was meant to be your here's what the problem is. But instead, it looks to me a bit like a set of random figures that you've managed to dig out, and it hasn't resonated properly. It's not telling me the problem.
Yeah, I think it doesn't really hit the mark at all. And I think here I should have been really explicit and really simple about articulating the problem. I'm just going to give myself an extra 10 seconds. I think I could have just said, for the consumer, it's impossible to read quality journalism from different publishers without paying a bunch of money to each different one. And that's a much clearer statement of the problem. And I could have equally done a very clear statement of the problem for publishers. And you're right, this doesn't really hit the mark in explaining
I think exactly right. Here's the problem for the publishers, here's the problem for the consumers.
So then we'll flip to the next page. So in this slide, I think I was trying to give weight to the fact that it was a problem for the publisher. I think I was sort of a nervous 23-year-old, and I wasn't sure that people would buy that this was an actual problem, so that I needed to put quotes in from the publishers to lend weight to the fact that it was a problem they were having. So I think that was my goal in putting this slide in.
So half done, I would say. I mean, I personally don't really do quotes, but because lots of people say lots of things, doesn't mean I believe in them. But it definitely does talk about the problems of the publishers. On the flip side, I guess it should have been covered in the previous slide, and I probably knew that already.
Yeah,
so wasted slide.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think it's a wasted slide, and I agree with your point that I think the Wall Street Journal, perhaps Godfrey Datic Partners, I think that's a bit niche. Perhaps not a lot of people know who they are. The Wall Street Journal quote is relevant. It could have gone in the other slide, the previous slide where we talk about the problem, as just an extra bit to articulate the publisher problem. But I agree with you. I think it's a wasted slide, and I'm not sure it really sort of has place in this deck. So yeah, I think that's it on that one. Reset the timer, and then the next slide. So here we go. This slide, I think, is really trying to explain the product. What FREAD actually is and how it actually works. It doesn't help, perhaps, so give myself an out here, that I sent the presentation along with a video demo of how the product works, which you guys can't see here. But this was meant to sort of accompany that and show what FREAD is and how it actually works from a consumer perspective.
I mean, it's great to tell me what it does, especially once you've got the problem. A universal instantaneous paywall is intriguing, I think. I'm not sure that what you say below is actually what FREAD does. What it allows is the payment of it, not necessarily the consumption. Again, it's a kind of half and half. I'm not sure I totally get it from this, but probably a really good slide. I think remembering it's a good slide to talk from. if you see what I mean. So you've laid it out. There's enough to make me interested, and then you can explain in a bit more detail here. Maybe the bit in the middle is not so good, but it's a kind of A minus.
Yeah, I agree, and I actually think, and this is perhaps a running theme in the rest of the deck. In terms of titles, I think it's just easier to be more explicit and clear. You're trying to tell a story with a narrative arc. So the first slide could have been the problem, and this could have been quite easily the solution. And I think you're right, the description isn't as simple as it could have been. And I think there's a much easier and clear way to articulate what FREAD is. A paywall for the internet. It allows people to read articles from multiple different places and pay a few pennies to do that. So I think
just to say, VK, I think that is a good point, and maybe this reflects the timing, as in 2017, I think it was. But this is about micropayments. You haven't really told me. I mean, there is the word micropayments, but I think that should be front and center myself.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Okay, cool. Next slide. So this is perhaps my least favorite slide. Here, I think I was trying to describe how easy it is for publishers to implement. And the thought process behind this page is that someone might say, VC, aha, but you work with publishers and they take a long time to agree to do anything, especially if they have to then implement a new piece of technology. So essentially, if you think about this as a marketplace, I was trying to say, it's actually quite easy to onboard the supply. They don't have to do very much to get on board. So that was the reasoning behind this slide.
I think that would have been a better slide, wouldn't it? Publishers don't need to do very much to get on board, because actually, in truth, I don't understand the slide, if I'm honest, which is probably my shortcomings. But it's that you should say that it's meant to be from the publisher point of view, because interestingly for me, the first thing, the single sign-on, I thought was maybe from the consumer point of view, a bit easier for the consumer rather than from a publisher point of view. The abstraction stuff is relatively obtuse.
Yeah, it's a little bit hallucinating to see this, but it's totally fine to just say it's very easy for a publisher to sign up. We just need to agree with them commercially, but then they have to do very little to no technical implementation. And to sort of leave it at that, there's no necessary need, particularly at this stage, to go into some of this technical stuff. And it kind of sits on its own. And it sits on its own, so it's given no context and it's not abundantly clear. So I agree, and I think that's totally fair. So moving on to the next slide. Oops. So here, the real aim of this slide is to illustrate the benefits for the consumers. So to essentially say, I told you what the status quo was before, this is why it's better for consumers. I don't really think I have much more to say on why I put this slide.
It's one of the better slides. It does tell me what it is. I think the one thing I'd say is you've put the benefits, but you've also tried to answer, it looks to me, a potential issue that people have. They easily set multiple payment thresholds, because people will say, well, what about just spending and then suddenly getting a huge bill? So you've anticipated, I guess, which is a good thing as well, but you anticipated a problem that people might highlight. But actually, this is a good, clear slide.
Yeah, I think it's probably perhaps one of the better slides. That's not saying a lot necessarily. I do still think, and this is going to be a running theme throughout the deck, that there is a way to have been even more explicit and even more clear. But by and large, it sort of explains the benefits for the consumers. If I was to do this again, I definitely would try and just make it even more simple and even more clear. Users can read multiple articles from different publishers without having to subscribe, without having to pay for multiple subscriptions. That is much clearer than perhaps what is on the page. So that's kind of all I would say on that.
Fair.
Right. Cool. So on to the next page. So this page, again, it does what it says on the tin. I'm trying to illustrate, once I've said the benefits for consumers, I'm trying to illustrate the benefits for the publishers, so the other side of this marketplace. I think, again, this is perhaps one of the better slides. I'm trying to articulate how they can make more money, collect more data, and even acquire full subscribers more cheaply than they do at the moment. So that was my intention with this slide.
Again, it's not a bad slide, this actually. It tells me what the benefits are. And I guess, again, quite a lot of detail here. The fight against fake news, I mean, that's something I think the publishers care about. Arguably, VCs care less about. I mean, there is a circularity there. But the real thing is, publishers have a problem monetizing. Here's how we're going to help them.
Yeah. And I think while this slide hits those points, again, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the point here is there was probably an easy way to say it. I think when I sort of explained what I was doing in this slide, that would have been the best thing to put on the page. It allows publishers to make more money, collect more data, and acquire full subscribers even more cheaply. And I think that's a far more simpler statement of the benefits of publishers. And I think that's really key when it comes to putting your thoughts down on the page, just making it clear and digestible for the VC who's trying to read through this and understand what's going on.
Excellent advice.
If I go on to the next page, oh no, not this one. On this page, I think what I was trying to do is illustrate, why this might be enticing for a consumer. I was trying to say, why would you pay twice as much as you pay for Spotify to read news? Well, you wouldn't. Then why would you pay twice as much than you do for Spotify to read a small part of the news, i.e. sort of an FT subscription? So that was my sort of main motivation and takeaway message that I wanted people to understand when they read this slide.
And it is, as you rightly say, almost incomprehensible, this slide. I mean, Millennial as an economist doesn't tell me anything. You don't actually tell me what the FREAD pricing will be or how much a FREAD subscriber will end up paying. And so I think, the last point is a good point. But I think, again, this one, I'm not even sure. I guess this hits something that sometimes we see, which personally, again, I know is from a different industry onto the say the Uber of news search or the Spotify of news search. And I think that can be helpful to describe it, but not if you're trying to say this is what we are from a value point of view.
Yeah, and again, just to maybe allow ourselves a tiny bit of extra time, to rebut, I think it's an important point and it's part of the customer value proposition, but I think your point's incorrect that, I don't articulate, where FREAD sits on this spectrum. And there is a much clearer and easy way to articulate, that the FT is really expensive for what it is versus Spotify. I don't think you need sort of the level of complication here. And I think it's also realistically part of the problem page as a line, as opposed to a whole page devoted to this.
But I think also, just to say, VK, because obviously we are running out of time, but the real point is that if I wanted the FT, the Times, and the I'd be paying 500, 600 and whatever it is, 64 pounds or something. So that's the comparison. It's not FT against Spotify. It's all of the subscriptions against Spotify.
Yeah. No, and yes, and again, I think there's an easier way to make that point, and probably should have been done around the problem page. So if we go on to the next slide. Now, this one is a really tough slide to digest. Here, I was trying to illustrate the upside for a publisher. I think my thinking was, someone might get to the deck and, if they've managed to follow it, they might say, well, is this small fry? Is this really important to a publisher? Do they have more important things to worry about? So my illustration here was to try and say, these are the number of people that bounce off a paywall for a typical publisher. I picked the Times, and this is the revenue opportunity that we could provide them. And this is how much extra money, incremental money we could make them per year by trying to convert some of those people that bounce off the paywall. So that was my motivation.
Again, it's a complicated slide. I mean, even if we were talking about it in the presentation, I think it'd be complicated. And I'm also going to say, I thought this was a market size slide rather than a here's why the publishers care slide. I've already bought into the publishers care because their model's a bit broken. And when I look at this from a market size perspective, it's possibly not big enough. Maybe because you've just one publication here, but even in year 4, you're passing that publication an extra £6.7 million a year. I don't know what that is in the context of the Times' overall revenues, but it probably should be larger. Your share is only going to be, you haven't told me yet, but let's say 10%. That's only £670,000 per publication. So you need to tell me then that there are a lot of publications.
Yeah, and again, allowing ourselves to run over, I think this slide has elements of market sizing. It also has a little bit of the business model in the sense that in a tiny footnote, it tells you how much percentage we will take. And those things should be covered off more in separate slides. And you're right. I think there is a danger that this doesn't, it makes the market seem small if a VC reads this as a market sizing page. And I guess the final point on here is, there's no context. So, yes, you could make the Times 6 million potentially, but as you said, I don't know how much money the Times make. Do they make $1 billion a year? So this is actually really small fry. I don't really address that here. So, to some extent, it doesn't really do what I even wanted it to do in the first place. I don't know if you had anything else to
know. No, I think that's fair. I mean, I just, probably wouldn't have put this in. It's too detailed.
Yeah, cool. Last. So I think this is the last slide. I think the real motivation here was, this is the opportunity that we're attacking now, and I wanted people to buy into the fact that it's not, or it won't always just be about micropaying for news, that there is a broader market and a broader application to micropayments. And it was essentially to try and get VCs interested or angel investors interested in the fact that this could be a broader market with a venture kind of scale case.
Yeah, I mean, look, it actually does do that. It does that kind of, it has that kind of right balance between mystique, i.e. not telling you that much, but kind of potential growth. I think the clarity with which you said it just then is probably not necessarily conveyed by this slide, and maybe as a reflection of you being able to look back at the presentation. But I didn't mind this. I mean, it shows there are future uses for this, which of course we all want. The one thing I would say though is, do you need to make an apology for the fact that you might just be a news thing? I don't think so. It's a large enough market, so you might as well have kind of really gone for that. You don't need necessarily.
Yeah, I think if I look at it as I look today, I think news is a big market, and maybe you don't need to make an apology for it. I do think it is exciting to talk about broader applications. I think this does do that a little bit. I think there are elements of it which was a bit throwaway, and perhaps there's a different, more detailed way to do it. So maybe explain.
The question is: are you a micropayments company? You've got masses of different uses, but you're going to start with news. Or are you a news company who might be able to do other stuff afterwards? That is the balance, I guess, which I'm not sure I know.
Cool. Moving on, just because conscious of time, this is the last page. What was I trying to do here? I think I was trying to put something slightly interesting that maybe is not relevant, that's not seen in other decks. Something that would allow me to be remembered by the VC who says, "Oh yes," or the angel investor, "Oh yes, there's that deck with the weird Chinese quote in it." So that was the intention. I don't know if you wanted to reveal.
Well, actually, for me, it epitomizes exactly where I think what was driving the way that you wrote this presentation and where possibly you went wrong. A lot of it was about trying to be different. But the way you were trying to be different, I think, was way brighter than a lot of people. So you were doing it in a very clever way. So this is a very clever kind of play on to the Chinese curse or the Chinese proverb. Of course, utterly irrelevant to the business. But I think throughout this, there was an element of maybe trying to be too complicated and too visionary, where in fact, it would have been much better just to have, here's the problem, it's big, here's the solution, we've got it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think by and large, that epitomizes the deck. There's a sense of, when I think back at myself and I look back on it over the fullness of time, and hindsight's a wonderful thing, there's a level of insecurity which reflects the immaturity. This is sort of the second or third person I'd spoken to about this. This is like week 2, week 3. But there's definitely a certain amount of insecurity around what I was doing and unsureness. And the best way to actually be is very clear, upfront, and straightforward. This problem.
VK, you've actually touched on something really interesting there, which is, I think some of, say, insecurity, which I've been through as well when I was pitching as a younger person, but actually, the problem here is that it's very early stage business. So you're very conscious, I feel, that you don't have a lot of facts and figures to talk about. But rather than being upfront with that, you try to hide them somewhat within these kind of clever quotes. The reality is that it's better to be upfront, because we're going to find that out anyhow, A, and B, it is what it is. What this is about is we want to be, we want to be huge, and we think we can do that. I suspect that part of the problem, not maybe on this slide, but just when you're presenting to us, is you're very aware, because you've done your research, that we're a bit later stage. So in a way, saying we're very early stage kind of contradicted our thesis. But I personally find it's quite interesting. Would I remember you as a result of it? I don't sure, but what I am pretty sure is that when we got to this time, you would have been quite self-deprecating about it, which actually might have lost some of the kind of essence of how good you are. Do you know what I mean? So you make a bit of a joke about it, it kind of makes you look less impressive, whereas you are super impressive.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. No, I think that's a totally fair point. I think that's the end of the day. That's the last page. I think
it shouldn't be, should it? Because there are some very obvious slides missing from this.
Yeah.
I think just to run through them. I mean, I know we're conscious of time, but just to say, why is there no team slide? At no point have we got a slide that says, "Here's the team."
Yeah, and as an early stage venture, particularly when you get to our stage, which is a little bit later than this, which is pre-seed, it's incredibly important because you are backing a team. That isn't here. Honestly, the reason it wasn't here was because it was just me, and I was a little bit, again, it comes back to being insecure. I didn't necessarily want to flag to everyone at the start that it is just a one-man band at the moment. Ultimately, you have to be honest and upfront, and actually there's nothing wrong with that from a VC perspective or an angel perspective. Pardon?
No, I think that's right. Okay, second missing slide. Where's the ask? How do I know whether you want £1, £1 million, £1 billion?
Yeah, you're right. Again, that's missing. Again, the reason it wasn't there was because I think I was so new to this, I wasn't sure whether I could raise 30,000 or 150,000 or 700,000. But again, a pivotal slide because it really anchors everyone's expectations, and it gives you an opportunity as an entrepreneur to then say, this is what I'm raising, and this is why I want to spend the money and how I will spend the money, and it peels back another layer of the entrepreneur's thinking. So, it's a key slide. It's a real must, and it's just not here.
And I think that follows on to maybe two more slides that I probably would have. And one of them is your go-to-market strategy. So this is to raise money to actually go to market. But what are you going to do? And so I suppose it, from your point of view, it hits that kind of uses of funds.
Yeah, absolutely. Uses of funds and clear sort of what are we going to accomplish in 6 months' time, in 12 months' time with that runway. In this case, it should have been, we want to have signed up 3 publishers. We want to have acquired this many users. But it really opens up an opportunity for you and the VC to have a discussion around, or the angel, okay, if you're going to acquire users, that many users, what are your assumptions around that? And that's really missing here. And again, a pivotal slide, which should have been there.
And you're right, actually, about that needing to have a discussion. So if you can get things with a discussion, as soon as you get an investor discussing, you've got them more likely to invest, to be honest, because they're sufficiently interested. And in their mind, they're thinking, oh, maybe if this happened, then this would be big. So I think that you've actually hit on a very interesting point there, is how do you get a discussion?
Yeah. That's kind of it. We're sort of running short on time. I had 1 or 2 key learnings that I just wanted to add in, but Rogan, do you think we have time for one or two quick fire questions, or should we just go to sort of the roundup?
Well, I've looked through the questions. They're super interesting, and maybe we can try to formulate another provision around them. There is one which is a bit harsh, or at least it's a bit harsh to ask you, but the one which asks why FREAD failed, which I think is probably, even though it's unfair to ask, it's probably on everybody's lips, given that we have opened up about the pitch and the original thing. I don't know, I mean, not too long, but was there one bit that you think was a failure? I don't think it was a result of the presentation that it hasn't worked. Was it the lure of pro-founders?
Well, I guess the reason FREAD and the lure of pro-founders was great, Rogan, but I probably wouldn't attribute it necessarily to just that. I think it wasn't the presentation. I have to admit I don't want to sound too arrogant, but the deck does improve over time. By the time you get to sort of version 62, it's a little bit better. I'm not sure it was necessarily the pitch. I think the key task, and I see it as the key task of an entrepreneur, particularly in the early stage, is to get traction. Be that traction with users, customers, be that traction with people that want to come and work for you, be that with fundraising. And I think I took a little bit too long to understand, and that's probably a poor reflection on me, but I took a little bit too long to understand that, and I started generating traction too late, and I ended up running out of runway. So that's essentially the reason why FREAD failed. I struggled to overcome the cold start problem of getting publishers and users on board at the same time, and doing that at sufficient scale. I waited too late to do that. So that's sort of my potted reason for why it failed.
Very good, very good. So yeah, I'd love to hear the learnings from the presentation, or to end it up, and maybe you could end with another pithy
quote,
proverb.
Yeah. So very quickly, guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll be adding this video along with the questions that were asked. I'll provide answers to those to our new Provision community. I will be resending the link around, but I encourage you all to look through it. All of the questions from season 1 are up there, searchable, and we'll be doing the same for season 2. I guess as a summary for my key learnings on the deck, I think one thing that we all saw there was it wasn't as simple as it could have been. Simplicity is key, be explicit. Fundraising is about telling a story, and the simpler you can make that story, the easier it is for someone to buy. 2, I think you shouldn't really shy away from using pictures. I've seen them used in decks in a really good way. A picture tells 1,000 words, so I think they can be really instrumental to simplify that story and tell a story and convey a message much easier than words. I think the last thing is really do send it to friends before you decide to send it out to investors. Sometimes you can get so deep down the rabbit hole as an entrepreneur that you write things down and they seem self-evident to you, but they're not when someone looks at it, particularly coming cold to it. So sending it to friends who haven't seen it before and getting as much feedback as possible is a good mechanism to work through simplifying that message and making it as impactful as possible before you then send it to potential investors.